For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.
Okay, looks like we are live. We got a special event tonight. We got a good debate, universal ancestry or independent origins. I've got Todd here, who his YouTube channel is, am I saying it right, Todd? It's OutSci'Ed.
I would say outside or OutSci'Ed, because either way it reflects my personality.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. This is going to be a lot of fun. I want to say thank you to the audience for your patience. We just wanted to make sure that we could start with no technical difficulties and make this as smooth as possible. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We've got Speed of Sound here. No stranger to debates in this community and no stranger to this channel, as well as Praise I Am That I Am, who are going to be moderating this debate. Let me hand it over to them for a second. They can go over the format for the night. And I also want to thank them both for giving us their time to help out with this important debate. So whoever wants to start, thanks for being here. Speed and Praise.
Go ahead, Praise.
So tonight's format will be 13 to 14-minute opening, 6-minute rebuttal, and then a 50-minute open discussion period with 3-minute intervals. So as someone starts speaking in the open discussion, we're going to let them proceed up to 3 minutes, and then after that it goes to the next person. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this. No over talking, no bullying, and me and Speed of Sound will try to handle that. So yeah, good luck everyone.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Praise. Yes, definitely looking forward to this one. Speed, thanks for helping out. Thanks for moderating this with us.
Yeah, we're doing an after show after this on my channel, but I am the token atheist here. My only job is to yell at these guys if they overtalk. So fairly, and I will be fair about that. So
we'll make sure not to mess with you. I've seen you moderate debates before, Speed. Even though we may have disagreements, you do remain neutral and fair. So I respect that. I respect that. And Todd, thank you as well for doing this debate. Looking forward to it.
Welcome.
Thanks for giving me your time for this. So why don't I hand it over to you for a brief introduction? You're kind of new to this channel, so if you can go over what you're doing, who you are, anything you might want to let the audience know about yourself.
Okay, well, I'll try to keep it within the confines because we had talked a little bit about time and whatnot, but I should be able to get it done in there. But anyways, hello to everybody. I am Todd of the OutSci'Ed channel. I've actually changed my channel around a few times over the years in kind of a different format. So I actually have a couple different channels on YouTube, but most of them do pertain somewhere to work in statistics and that, and for my job and things regardless. But the big thing I just kind of wanted to say is I'm not new to this whole topic of creation and evolution. In fact, I've been in this for a very long time, not in this community, but in the community of talking to people, the old church I used to go to, the community I grew up with. In fact, I came from an area where when you went to meet different people or when you ran into different people, they didn't ask you necessarily, like, do you go to church? They would ask you, what church do you go to? Now, here's the thing. I do not want to get into religion in this debate specifically because I am about science education. And I will stick to that because I do believe that the idea of science and religion can coexist to people. I do admit to myself, I do struggle with that, but that doesn't mean that I don't see how some people can find that in there. So I'm going to strictly stick to the scientific principles here, but just to kind of give you a little bit about my upbringing in there, this isn't something I'm new to. So I did go through this. I did earn a degree in biology as well, and I was very strongly following creationists at the time. But back in those days, there was no YouTube. There was Google Video. There was little corners of the internet. There was passing DVDs around at church. And those were the good old days. So those of you that get to go and click and look up answers on YouTube now, you can count your blessings. But back in those days, when I was earning my degree in biology, it was a constant struggle. How do I reconcile this with my faith? Now, people can say to me today, well, if you turn from being a creationist, you clearly were not a true creationist. And that is a no Scotsman fallacy. You're no true Scotsman. I was an ardent creationist, very much so. In fact, I could out-talk you on any subject about creationism back then. In fact, I was so hungry for more answers, I sought it from as many places as I could, and I had to go outside my church for that. However, I knew that it would be a difficult thing earning a degree in biology and encountering all this. So I did everything I could. And I would like to thank people like Dr. Kent Hovind back then, because I remember learning as much as I could from him. In fact, when I took electives in my degree, you could sign up for cell biology, developmental, and I took evolution because I thought, I want to challenge myself on this. I don't want to take the easy stuff. And when I took the class, I remember they gave us a final exam assessment, but it was one of those things my professor was trying to show us the bell curve. And I remember when she put the stuff up on the screen, there was one person on the final, and this was a final assessment, and whatnot. There was one person who got
Todd,
above 90%.
I just wanted to cut you off real quick, Todd. As long as you understand, this is just your intro to just yourself. So this wouldn't be your
I was told I had a 14-minute intro. I was not aware of that. But,
I'm saying this is just an introduction of who you are, as in breaking the ice. Then we'll get into your opening presentation versus intro.
Nope, I was not told there was an intro. So, I was just trying to keep my stuff within my time constraints. All right, go ahead. No.
If you want to start, so thanks for being here. I'll give a brief introduction. I mean, for myself, this is my channel.
You told me I was going first, and that's why I wanted to. I thought I didn't want to lose time. But okay, thank you.
Well, Todd, maybe because you're new to the debate community. So typically what we do is I think it's just kind of respectful nature for any debate is we allow the debaters to give a brief introduction as to who they are, what they're doing at their channel. That would be separate from the opening presentation. So that's fine. So when you start, you could just restart your time. There's no worries there. So for myself, obviously, so for myself, I'm no stranger to this channel, obviously. I'm looking forward to this. I've personally had roughly about 60 formal debates, and I've been studying this topic for quite a few years. So I believed in evolution throughout my college years and feel I understand the theory quite well. I feel it's important to understand each other's positions to argue against it appropriately. So that's just my brief introduction. Everybody knows who I am. I appreciate your introduction as well, Todd. Now what we'll do is we'll hand it over to you. You got between 13 and 14 minutes. No rush. Take your time for your opening statement, we'll call it. So go ahead. Whenever you're ready. If you need a screen share, let us know.
All right. Well, I appreciate it because I'll just restart the clock then. Like I said, I wasn't told there was an intro, so I just didn't want to lose my time and stop there. I've had that happen in the past.
Actually, don't start your clock. Actually, don't start your clock yet because your webcam image, I don't know if it's just me, it's really blurry. So if it's an issue continuing, you may want to just shut off your webcam or praise. You may want to, let's see. It looks better when it's like this. But we don't want people looking at a blurry image the whole time. So it's up to you. If we can improve it, keep the webcam on. If not, it might be better to shut it off.
Just let me know because you guys are coming in relatively fine. And like I said, I use this all day long. But then again, it is nighttime and maybe there's internet issues in the community or there's a lot of StreamYards taking place or something on the server. But just let me know. You can interrupt me too if you have to. Are you still there?
Yeah, I was on mute. So everything's good. Praise and Speed, since you guys are mods, maybe just watch out for how his side looks in terms of like blurriness. And if Todd needs to screen share, Praise, I can also control that too. But let's start.
Do you want to set up a screen share now, Todd?
Well, don't I just click on screen share down here?
But it takes like a minute or so.
I noticed that. So whatever I have to do, because I do have stuff to share on the screen though.
Yeah, go ahead and get that shared and then you start your timer.
All right, just click on this screen share.
Yeah.
So, see, that's the thing with this software. You have to practice it ahead of time. I'm used to Google Meets and Zoom, and it's a tad bit different than this.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'm not sure what to click on, but I would almost rather. All right, I clicked on screen share at the bottom, but I have nothing to share at this moment. So.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
So start timer. You ready?
Yeah.
Go.
I just hope I'm able to. Okay, I'll go ahead. I just wanted to. Hopefully, I don't lose my groove in there. No, I was just trying to say earlier, just to kind of give an introduction about myself, that people could easily put it off and say I was no true creationist. It's really frustrating to hear that. But I have watched debates over the years where people will accuse people of saying, well, you were not a true Christian, or you were, which again, I'm not going to try to get into religion in that, but they would say you are no true creationist because how could you see evolution and then change your mind? And that is something I've asked myself for a long time because it definitely was not a slow journey. However, it was a journey that did take me into the different corners where you had to start looking at different sources, really investigate the claims that people were saying. So, for example, I was trying to get back into, this is where I was trying to not lose my train of thought there. When I signed up for my elective class in college in evolution, there was one student that got above 90% on the final. My professor put it up on, kind of trying to show us the bell curve before she put the curve on the grade. And I remember with pride, I saw my grade was a 96%. And I thought to myself, here I am, a creationist, a young earth creationist, and I got a 96%, and the average on that test was in the low 70s. And I remember thinking, I know all this stuff, and clearly I do not believe this stuff. That was a proud moment for me. And, there is, you can understand there's a lot of pride with that. So I continued going on through, worked very hard during my degree, and then, of course, graduated. And I remember looking back saying, wow, I just earned a degree in biology. In fact, it was a 4.5-year degree with some field experience over the summer of 2005. And it was a very exciting thing. However, then I started, entering the adult world, and it was just one of those things where I started hearing claims, and the more I looked into it, the claims just didn't add up. And that's all I can stress to people is you have to look at the claims and see what people are, or you have to see what people are saying. So ultimately, where I stand now, creationism is a pseudoscience. It flat out is a pseudoscience. It's not science. One thing that people commonly will say with creationism, or should we say even intelligent design, is that we can offer this in school, or why isn't this offered in schools? And it's just another explanation of science. A lot of times people will say, well, nobody wants to believe God could say it. They just want naturalistic explanations for everything. And I used to believe that too. But I have to say now, nobody, well, maybe some people, but nobody really is saying that God couldn't have done this. And again, I suppose there are a few people, but I am not saying it is impossible for God to have created things. However, how do we make a prediction and test what it would look like if God had done it? The same thing with a ghost. If something was to fly off your counter, now we could sit here and get on a whiteboard and write all the explanations for why that flew off the counter there. And we could probably sit and come up with 100 different things, from maybe there was a magnetic field that changed, maybe there was a string pulling on it, or we could even say God did it. But each one of those other ones, I could probably come up with a test for. I could look for the strings. I could look to see if it was magnetic and it could be pulled on. Maybe look and see if there was a giant magnet outside. But no test I could do could see if a ghost actually knocked that over. That does not deny and say a ghost is not possible. It is just simply saying it's outside of science. Now, having said that, creationism is a pseudoscience because it does not follow the scientific method. It starts with a conclusion and it looks for evidence to fill in the gap. And so just to kind of show and explain what I'm trying to go through with this, I am going to try to share my screen at this time. And this is where you have to kind of bear with me a minute because I have to figure out this application sharing thing here. Okay. Actually, I'm probably just going to have to go through my, put this on myself. The scientific method, make an observation. We are supposed to see things without preconceptions in our mind. And we look at it and we always ask a question. What is this and how did it happen? Only then do you form a hypothesis and you try to come up with an explanation as to why it happened. This includes finding bones in the dirt. This includes, like I said, seeing something fly off the countertop. What we don't do is we look at rock layers and say, well, the Bible said that this happened, and therefore let's look for evidence and let's try to come up with different explanations for this. We don't start with a conclusion in science. And we can say at this moment that if everybody in the world lost now, maybe everyone in the world with knowledge of evolution and creation were to die and mankind was to restart over, we could honestly say that creationism would not come back. But knowledge about evolution and common descent would come back because it is testable. And that claim that it is not testable, it is just flat out false. Okay. So a couple of things here, because I'm also trying to watch my clock here. The scientific method is all about coming up with explanations that are testable. It is not saying a god or ghost could not do it, but it is saying that is not testable, and that is why it is outside of science. Now, intelligent design did try, to their credit, they did try to introduce the scientific method and thus get it taught in the science classrooms, because they were trying to say that an intelligence is needed to design these features. It is impossible without intelligence. And to their credit, they did try to go through and come up with different ways to explain it. But the truth is, it all failed because the later step in this is peer review. you must look at your colleagues and see what they say, because the truth is, it is quality control. Nobody is an authority in science. We just have experts. But quality control means we must rely on our collaboration. Creationism is kept alive in blogs. It's kept alive in the corners of the internet, just like if I wanted to see evidence of a flat earth. I can go online and look up evidence of the flat earth. So my big claim here is creationism is a pseudoscience. And the reason why is because creationism cannot come up with a testable hypothesis. So starting off, I'll make it easy and give a few ideas here. One common claim is that Mokele Membi, this dinosaur-like creature, lives in Africa, and it is a remnant, perhaps not extinct, of the dinosaurs living in the jungles of Africa. Okay, I don't think that would necessarily disprove evolution. It would be a really cool find, by the way, but it definitely would at least point creation in the right direction. Nobody's ever found this. All we have are stories, and I'm sorry of wackos out there that come up with these stories, and they're not understanding anthropology and why the natives are telling them the details that they are. Same thing with Loch Ness. Is it a coincidence that...
So we just lost OutScience.
Yeah,
So
6 minutes. So
yeah, I got him at 7 minutes, or a little bit under 7 minutes. So
yeah, if you're going 14, 7 minutes.
yeah.
He's back. Okay.
Well, here's the thing. I have a touchpad in front of me, and I touched the screen, and it hit the little X there on the screen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's okay. So, creationists, they tend to push the idea of the Loch Ness monster.
Do you want to
too.
share that again, or?
Well, I'll put it back up here in a second. But creationists,
Okay.
they tend to share the stories of the Loch Ness monster because it fits this idea that dinosaurs are relatively new and they might still be around. But that is one idea. Another one, a creationist prediction they could make, is faunal succession, falsifying it. Now, when we think of faunal succession, that is the idea that older animals are on the bottom in rock layers, and as we go to the top, there's more new modern creatures that are at the top of the layers there. So creationism, in order to be true, we could look for fossils that are out of order. And I've heard lots of explanations for this, but the fact is they do not have fossils out of order in faunal succession. So actually, I do have something I could share at this moment. I just have to pull it up here, because I took a little trip to the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter a little while ago. And they have ideas on this faunal succession, but it just completely blows my mind away. Whoops, let me pull this up here on my screen. Okay, hopefully this will pop up. Like I said, if the audience is hearing me, I am not used to StreamYard in the format, but I use the other software. They have pictures up here like this, and they have several other displays, and they say they accept this idea of faunal succession, that they're in this order, but their explanation is that the smarter organisms swam to the top. And so they said that's why we see birds at the top and humans, and we see dinosaurs, but then you look at the bottom and you see the trilobites. And then you realize what they're trying to do is explain a cartoon. They're not actually explaining what we see out in the real world. And that's what's disappointing about this, is because if you go out in the real world, you do not have the luxury of making stuff up like this. Another example is they could falsify fossils and how they are made. Now, 6 months ago, I debated Joe Taylor. He is of the Mount Blanco Museum in Texas, and he is a paleontologist himself, and he boasts a very large collection of mastodon skeletons and dinosaur. And I mean, he looks just like Robert T. Bacher. And I was debating him on this idea, and he asked me straight up, why don't we see fossils form today? And it's just kind of like, how do I answer a question like that? Why don't we see fossils form today? So I pulled out one of these pictures that I took in the field a few years ago, and I was on a hike out in Wyoming, I believe this was, and I saw this little crevice being carved out, and I saw top of a deer cranium in there. And this is in this little crevice, and there's mud being deposited in the top of the deer skull. And I was explaining to him that I found a few other deer that were dead nearby, but this one, the skull had washed away from the rest of the body. It was disarticulated, and it's now being covered with mud. That will create anaerobic conditions, which will prevent its decay. And then when more mud gets pushed into there, this will get covered, and it will too become a fossil. It is a basic principle of chemistry, how this will happen. But this guy who's a paleontologist, his response to me was, it'll just wash down further. And I said, well, okay, what about the sediments that are with it? Where are those going to go? And he said, well, they'll just wash down further with it. And I said, okay, but eventually the sand's going to cover this up and it's going to make a fossil. And he said, well, eventually it'll wash into the ocean. And then I said, well, okay, but once it gets in the ocean, where's all that sand and sediment going to go? It's going to bury it and become a fossil. And all he would do was change subjects at this point. So that's what I mean, is there is no prediction they're making that can be falsifiable. I'm going to try to talk about homology here, but obviously opening is going to be a rather short thing to get into. But what about homology? Jackalopes, you know, the rabbits without antlers on their head. How do we know those aren't real? And it's because they did not descend from antlered animals. But in creationist circles, why can't we look and see animals that share traits that are not related to each other like that? And they love to point out the duck-billed platypus without acknowledging that they may look alike, but they are not alike. Okay. Now, not just to come up with a prediction, creationism must also be falsifiable. And that means they have to come up with something that, if they find it, it would prove creationism false. And that is the ideas of Karl Popper, that we don't always just come out and try to find things to confirm ideas, but we try to prove them false. And as we chop away from our ideas and our theory, eventually we're left with something that remains behind, and it is a model. And that's why theories are ever changing, but they are usually durable, just like putting a puzzle together. So there's, I'm just trying to think of all the different things we can get in a short period of time, but I am at 12 minutes, so I do want to respect the time here. But regardless, I will stand by the claim that creationism is pseudoscience because it starts with a conclusion. It starts with the idea that we are all not connected, we are all not related, and it does not come up with a prediction that can be verified. Likewise, it does not come up with falsifiable material, and it doesn't have a way to be proven false. Typically, if they do say something, what usually results is a little goalpost shifting. Okay, with that said, I look forward to a good debate this evening, and I look forward to covering a variety of topics, although our format is going to be a little short, but hopefully we can have some more discussions in the future. Okay?
Awesome.
That's 13 minutes.
Yeah, I got 12 and under 12 and a half, so you have plenty of time to spare.
Oh,
Good
okay.
job. SFT, it's your turn. The floor is yours. When you're ready, you want to start the timer on your voice, on your word, first word.
Well, that's interesting.
Awesome. One second, Praise. I'm going to share my screen and all that. Maybe, and it looks like there's some issues in the chat too, Todd, and I appreciate the opening. Maybe for the time being, let's try and save some bandwidth. And maybe if you want, just shut off. There you go. There you go.
All right, I'll shut the camera off.
Try again later, but we find that if there are issues, say there's too many streams going on right now.
Sure, not a problem.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start my timer in a minute. I'm just going to share screen here. And okay, here we go. Todd, thanks so much for your opening statement there. And want to make sure everybody can see. I'll start my timer as well. And okay, let's get into this then. I'm really looking forward to this debate. Actually, Praise, can you mute anyone who's not talking just to avoid background noise?
Yeah.
I heard something there. Awesome. Okay, so I'm really looking forward to this debate on universal ancestry versus independent origins. I'm going to present various lines of overwhelming evidence that can only be explained by the biblical model of ancestry. First off, let's get right into the evidence that would be considered agnostic to the debate. That is the evidence that can be explained by both models, creation and evolution. He talked about homology. Okay, how about homology? Well, we know that human engineers design in homologous patterns. Across the globe, we see shared designs and even shared blueprints. This is basic. There are also incredible differences. I like the way geneticist Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins explains both the differences and the obvious similarities. He explains this perfectly well in his book, More Than a Monkey. In addition to the major differences that exist between the human and chimp genomes in regard to chromosome numbers, orphan genes, incomplete lineage sorting, Y chromosome DNA, and overall genome similarity, there are also major differences in how genes are utilized or expressed. The fact is that humans and chimps, like other mammals, have similar cell physiologies and gross morphological similarities as well. Therefore, we do have a large number of genes that share high levels of similarity in their DNA sequence. What about the so-called existence of transitional forms? Well, think of a military vehicle that blends the features of both a land vehicle and a vehicle built for the ocean. For example, an amphibious assault vehicle. Creationists too predict interesting mosaics. Fascinating mosaics are always the exception to the rule. I find that evolutionists love the exception to the rule as an argument. Lastly, nested hierarchies, as is shown here, are simply characteristics of design and reflective of God's hierarchical nature. Since we were made in the image of God, we should be able to get a sense for how he may have designed the biological world based on how we design things. It turns out that we too build and design in hierarchical patterns. Of course, we would expect more in common in terms of anatomy, morphology, physiology, and genetics with a human and a chimp than between a human and a fish, or between a human and a bacteria. Once again, this is basic. These arguments employed by evolutionists would be like arguing for evolution, or even arguing for creation by pointing out the blueness of the sky, or the roundness of the earth. What in the world? Both models, creation and evolution, can explain why the sky is blue and why the earth is round. We need to focus on that which can differentiate between the models. I'm going to demonstrate why independent origins and a literal scientific Adam and Eve best explains the data. We can start off by making some predictions and retrodictions. What does scripture tell us regarding the origins of humanity? Clearly, what we see is independent origins and non-relationship to the apes. The Bible says one man and one woman, Adam and Eve, of course. Basic genetics tells us the man passes down the Y chromosome and the woman passes down the mitochondrial DNA. If the Bible's account of human origins is true, we should be able to look at these two DNA compartments, the uniparentally inherited DNA, and trace them back to two common ancestors, two individuals. Amazingly, the data confirms this. And this did not have to be true if evolution was true. There could have been any number of mitochondrial DNA ancestors and any number of Y chromosomal ancestors. We could have also been very similar to the chimpanzee Y chromosome or the chimpanzee mitochondrial DNA, and yet what we find is that we are extremely different to the chimp in both these DNA compartments. When we look at these DNA compartments, we can build some very telling family trees. We will be looking at a mitochondrial DNA tree in just a few minutes. But first, I want to point out that we prefer a more straightforward approach to mutation rates that does not assume deep time and does not assume ape to man evolution. There is no need to assume that humans and chimpanzees split from a hypothetical common ancestor millions of years ago. This would actually be a circular way of doing things. In a moment, I will show exactly why my opponent Todd here cannot legitimately assume the chimp to human split and thus use the phylogenetic method. Measured mutation rates it's actually the most empirical way of using the molecular clock. I like high confidence science and not low confidence science. An example of low quality and low confidence science would be, of course, the pathetic fossil record that involves assumptions, interpretations, inferences, and storytelling. He pointed to rocks, fossils, geology, for example. Well, it's DNA that's inherited sperm and egg, not a bone, not a rock, and not a fossil. It is in genetics. This is where we can best determine and answer the question of ancestry. All we do with the empirical method is we simply compare mutation rates in the present using parents to offspring. This is what's called the pedigree-based method. Now, remarkably, when comparing mutation rates between parents and children, the mutation rate is much faster than the phylogenetic rate, which actually assumes ape to man evolution. Mutation rates are fast, and guess what? There are only a few mutations in the genome. For example, there are only a few mutations that separate any human being from the mitochondrial Eve DNA consensus sequence. We know Eve, we have her sequence. More on this in a bit. Measured mutation rates are where we get a very young Eve, and as a matter of fact, it is also where we get a young Y chromosome ancestor, being Noah, of course, according to our model. I want to point out the fact that evolutionists do not want to use this fast mutation rate because it conflicts with their deep time evolutionary story. Well, guess what? That is just too bad. Therefore, evolutionists love the fossil record because they love to pull out the storyboard, of course. Let's focus primarily on the mitochondrial DNA for now. The mutation rate in this DNA compartment is far too fast for the evolutionists. What they want to do when it comes to mutation rates in this DNA compartment is look at the differences between humans and chimpanzees and say, oh, looks like we have been separated for X number of years, millions of years, of course, according to them. As a matter of fact, the number has actually changed quite a bit throughout history. This has a lot to do with the fact that there is a huge waiting time problem in being able to fix so many new mutations in the human and chimpanzee lines following the hypothetical split. Okay, let's have some fun. Let's give you a solid visual on all of this right here. And this debate is regarding universal or separate ancestry. So I don't want Todd to waste time focusing on the evidence that is agnostic, the evidence that both models can explain. Remember, both models can explain why the sky is blue. I want him to explain the differentiating evidence. Todd, please explain this data for me, or unfortunately, universal common ancestry fails. This right here is human mitochondrial DNA. I got this photo from Dr. Robert Carter, who took this from the 1,000 Genomes Project. This is a family tree of all the mitochondrial DNA genomes in the world. And I hope everybody can notice the obvious pattern. Evolutionists typically close their eyes at this part. This pattern is exactly what we would expect with explosive growth from a single person. There is history on this tree. We see geography. We see African-specific groups, Europeans, Asians, etc. This is all very fascinating and empirical, and we can make testable predictions that are falsifiable. Something that Todd said we do not make as biblical creationists. So back to the pattern, This is exactly what we would expect given the biblical Eve. We are looking at, as I stated earlier, explosive growth from right here, a center point. Also, please, over here, if you can see my mouse here, please have a look at this haplogroup in Europe, HVR. Notice how the branches have different lengths. Do you know what this means? These people all have a common ancestor, and yet one group in there have happened to pick up twice as many mutations as their cousins. If we can pick up more mutations in the same amount of time, this means we cannot look between humans and chimpanzees and make an assumption about when they split. X million years ago, for example, as they would say or purport. This right here is random mutations occurring in populations over periods of time. What we see is a pattern. This pattern goes back to a center point, as you can see here. Mitochondrial DNA mutates fast. We're looking at one woman, recent, exactly what the Bible says. Mitochondrial DNA has very little variation worldwide. Humans in general have very low genetic diversity. How does Todd explain the data? What testable predictions can he make? What rescue device will he invoke? The post hoc, ad hoc, out of Africa population bottleneck? We shall see. Evolution is dead. Can Todd make testable predictions on mitochondrial DNA phylogenetics and mutation rates? Remember, it's genetics. It's DNA that's inherited sperm and egg. Look at this tree one more time before we move on. This is clearly a reflection of only thousands of years and not hundreds of thousands of years as proponents of human evolution would purport. There are not a lot of mutations on this tree at all. Without evolutionary-based assumptions, the clear and obvious conclusion is that this tree is young. And we've all descended from a single female ancestor who is nothing like the chimpanzee. I like the way Dr. Carter points out that on average, there is about one mutation every other generation. This means that this tree is only a few hundred generations. What a coincidence that this is exactly where the biblical Eve is. Not to mention all mitochondrial DNA is incredibly similar. Nothing like the chimpanzees. We have low genetic diversity. Our Y chromosomes are geographically specific and also contain low variation, with no highly or ancient or highly mutated Y chromosomes. Can Todd show me a highly mutated Y chromosome on this planet anywhere? This is bad for deep time evolution. Evolutionists don't use measurable mutation rates. Okay, let's take the last 3 to 4 minutes here to fly through some more irrefutable lines of evidence for independent origins and against universal common ancestry. Okay, all Y chromosomes, and pay attention to the images and papers that I have here. All Y chromosomes can be traced to one single Y chromosomal ancestor. All male Y chromosomes on the planet are incredibly similar. There is very low variation in the Y chromosome, indicating that we came from a single ancestor in the not so distant past. Here's some testable predictions based on this model. Exactly what Todd said we don't do. He might not be up to date on the data. Now, guess what? The Y chromosome has also been found to mutate fast. There was only a few mutations separating any person on the planet from the Y chromosome Adam sequence, or according to our model, Y chromosome Noah. There are only about 4,500 years worth of mutations, as you've seen from this paper here, in this male-specific chromosome. The only way to explain a Y chromosome that is incredibly similar worldwide, but also mutates fast and does some pretty weird things is by the biblical creation model of ancestry. It turns out that when the chimpanzee Y chromosome was sequenced, as you can see here, it was discovered to be less than 70% like the human Y chromosome. The Y chromosome is uniparentally inherited DNA, as I stated earlier. It is essentially immune to recombination. The Y chromosome should have been vastly more similar between humans and chimps. How does Todd address these problems with his model? The allelic patterns we see today have been explained very easily through numerical simulations. The genetic patterns we see can be explained simply by the fact that we see fast mutation rates, fast recombination rates. As a matter of fact, as you can see here, exceedingly fast in many African people groups because they have more working PRDM9 enzymes. And gene conversion, of course, will help significantly. For evolution to be true, they need to slow these numbers down exponentially and unrealistically. We do not. The rates fit perfectly. And if they need to speed up at all, this can easily be done with our two biblical bottlenecks, creation and the flood, rapid genetic fixation. I could go on all day. I've got 2 minutes here. So since I've only got the 14-minute, let me just end with some questions and arguments I want Todd to find time to address in either his rebuttal or discussion. How does Todd explain away all the latest research showing clearly the overturning of human evolution? Paper after paper and article after article, as you can see here. New studies shake up human family tree. Australopithecus sediba, not likely humans' ancestors. Human missing link fossils, maybe jumble of species. No more clarity to human evolution. We can see here that there's extensive developmental abnormalities and pathology in the fossil record consistent with our model of post-Babel dispersion.
1 minute.
Thank you, praise. We see footprints here. Laetoli footprints in Crete. Neanderthals buried their dead, used medicine, dental hygiene. Nothing but a variant of human. Humans and Neanderthals, less different than polar bears and brown bears. Human genetics shows that Neanderthals are highly inbred. How does Todd explain the evidence for forward-thinking mechanisms in the genome? Epigenetics, for example. So I got 30 seconds here. Let me finish with a couple more questions. How does Todd explain the functional retrotransposons according to his model? What about the functional orphan genes that show independent ancestries? How does Todd explain this incredible class of taxonomically restricted and essential genes? These orphan genes defy universal ancestry. These genes are unique sets of coding sequences that are specific to particular organisms, and they show no consistent hierarchy. We can get into the chromosome 2
Time. Great stuff.
Awesome.
Good. Great opening.
Perfect. Thank you.
Now we're going to go in the 6-minute rebuttal period. So on your word, Todd, the floor is yours. Whoops, hold on. He's on mute.
Oh, sorry. Oh, good. Are you able to hear me at this time? Okay,
Yep.
well,
Yep.
my neighbor I noticed my neighbor is blasting his music too. That's a symptom of Friday night. So if that's coming in, I do apologize here on this microphone. The reason creationism is able to make these claims, first of all, is because they bypass the second to last skip of the scientific method, and that is rigorous peer review, which is quality control. The comments made here that evolution is being falsified by genetics and being falsified by homology. Come on here now. The truth is, it's being kept alive in the realms of echo chambers, which is the corners of the internet, which is by people that are in a tight-knit community sharing these ideas and not trying to look for falsehoods. They're trying to confirm an idea that they must hold to. And that is how this is how these ideas hold in. So I'll give you an idea here. Let me pull up my screen because I don't have all of these in a PowerPoint. But I took a trip to the Creation Museum 4 years ago, and I spotted Lucy because this is one thing that creationists love to talk about, despite the fact that she is just one of the many types of hominid fossils we have. And I noticed they put her in the portrayal of a gorilla standing on all fours, being a knuckle walker like this. And they said, this is just simply an interpretation of the fossil. However, one prime thing we need to know about anatomy is a central theme is structure determines function. You can look at the structure of your body and have a good idea as to why that body part is like that. Lucy had angled femurs. This is a feature for standing upright. Lucy had locking knees. Now that doesn't mean she was fully walking upright, but to put her down like this and show her walking like a gorilla is neglecting the evidence, and it is trying to shine her in a different light. So let's take a look at the genetic evidence, because I'm baffled to hear for really the first time in a long time outside of creation, since being outside of creationist circle, that the genetic evidence is somehow falsifying evolution. Because the truth is that genetic evidence is actually confirming this. And if only Darwin was alive to actually see the genetic evidence. So I remember this day. I don't know about you, but long time ago, because you said you were an evolutionist, back in the day, we, of course, knew humans had 24 or 23 chromosomes. Primates have 24 chromosomes. Whoops, my PowerPoint is stuck here. Okay. The common question we had to ask prior to the days of the completion of the Human Genome Project is how could we have this common shared ancestry with the rest of the primates? There was an idea that perhaps we lost a chromosome, which we would call like a monosomy condition, but obviously that wouldn't make sense. We know there would be a lot of genetic defects here. So one prediction evolution could make here is that we could look for something in the genome, maybe a chromosome fusion of sorts. Again, how could creationism explain this? They would say that this is simply independent origin. But the answer came in 2008, because in 2001, the Human Genome Project was completed. And due to our rapidly emerging technology, the Chimpanzee Genome Project was completed. And it turns out the answer is right there in chromosome number 2, chromosome 12 and 13. And this was a prediction evolution was able to make, that we would find, kind of like fortune telling, we can see in the future that we would eventually find something in the DNA evidence. How can creationism explain this? I have heard of explanations, and frankly, it's laughable. You really have to twist this really hard and spin it, as I'm doing here, I suppose, with spinning that to make this fit. But if we take chimpanzee chromosome 13 and 12, and we put them right on top of each other like this, you see a perfect match of our chromosome number 2. Now, a prediction could also be made from this. The centromere, which is the not so middle part of the chromosome, but it's where the kinetochore is at for splitting during mitosis. There's a protein filament there. And we can see the 2 centromeres that would be on the chimpanzee 2 chromosomes. So the next prediction was made. Where is this extra centromere? And all it took was a short period of time. Sure enough, we have, you could say, a fossil relic. There is a second fossil, almost, I could use the word fossil, centromere in our own chromosome 2. This shows us, and we were able to predict this ahead of time, that our chromosome number 2 is a fusion of, well, we could say the ape chromosomes. And we are not a descendant of a chimpanzee, by the way, but we are a descendant of the apes, and we still are an ape, by the way. Okay, so next thing, homology. I like the analogies of the car because it does illustrate the ideas of homology very well. But one thing we have to think about in biology is when you look at any group of animals, why is it any group of animals shares characteristics in common? So, for example, if we look at, pentadactyl limbs, we can see these. This is obviously a favorite of creationist and evolutionist textbooks, so I'm sure this is heard, and I figured I'd introduce this off here. This is a favorite one because it illustrates these parts all have common features, and it's because we are all vertebrates. You don't see these in insect lineages. However, we will never see these traits. You'll never see a mammal with a beak. You will never see... Okay, thank you. You'll never see rabbits with antlers. You will never see a crocodile head on a duck like this. Evolution does not predict this because they did not evolve from the same lineages. I'll give you another one here. Okay, is an echidna related to a hedgehog? Because I look at it and I could say, wow, they're pretty similar, because creationists have a very loose definition for kind. And they would say any 4th grade kid can look at this and say it's the same kind of animal. Because I look at it and it kind of looks like the same kind of animal, but no. The hedgehog is actually related to the moles. And the echidna is actually related to the platypus. And you can see this in all the features it has. It is a monotreme. It is related to the platypus. It has vitamin C only synthesized in its skin. It has ear bones in its skull. All of these features, but you can look even closer at it, and you can tell this is related to each other, just like you could if you had a DNA test and you looked at your child. It is related to each other. I believe that's 6 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your rebuttal. And SFT, when you're all ready in your first word, I'll start the timer when you're ready.
Awesome. Don't start it just yet because I will be screen sharing. Actually, I'll say a couple things. You can start it right now on my first word. So this is going to be pretty easy. He addressed almost nothing of my opening, probably all went over his head. If Darwin was alive, he would probably be, and praise, just make sure you're muting other people. If Darwin was alive, he would probably be a creationist, given how significantly the genetic data demonstrates independent origins. He didn't even attempt to rebut the Y chromosome data, the mitochondrial mitochondrial DNA data, for example, that actually leads to accurate testable predictions and retrodictions. Evolution has attempted to make predictions and failed. For example, the fusion event that he harps on, I'll destroy that in 1 second, actually. Todd must not also be aware of the fact that Afarensis is a chimeric species. You know what? I'll screen share here real quick just to go over a few things on the human evolution side of things. Okay, so with the chromosome 2 fusion, there's some major problems there based on the fact that the site itself is far too degenerate. There's absence here. I'm not sure if Todd's familiar with the Ventura paper, but we're looking at a lack of evidence for not only ape-specific satellite DNA, but also for the cryptic centromere itself. I know he pointed to an area. We can discuss why that actually cannot be the purported area for the cryptic centromere, but this so-called fusion site itself is actually overlapped by a functional gene. You can't get functional genes by slamming together two chromosomes. It's just not going to happen. Now, fusion events do happen. So the fact is, the evidence, the genetic data seems to suggest that there wasn't a fusion event. But even if there was a fusion event, it's better explained from our model since we can explain it through a bottleneck at the flood. Todd, I've heard, said that God made it that way. He must be ignorant of basic genetics because fusion events do happen. We see it. Therefore, if it occurred, it makes sense that every single human being today would have it because of that bottleneck of 8 people. How does he explain, according to his model, every single human being today having that fusion event? But before he answers that, he's going to have to answer, why is the area so degenerate? Why are the sequences that are found there, why are they found all throughout the genome as functional DNA units? Not even unique or specific to a fusion site, and also explain why there is a lack of ape-specific satellite DNA at that area. Let's get into some of his human evolution claims. Yeah, he pointed to the fossil record. What we see in the fossil record is abrupt appearance, stasis, and significant overlap. With the Australopithecines, he must be out of date on the latest discoveries, because his so-called ancestors, the Australopithecus afarensis, which Lee Berger says is a mixed species, mixture of Homo bones and Australopithecus bones. This is a fact. This occurs. For example, Australopithecus sediba, as you can see on the screen here, human missing link, fossils, maybe jumble of species. These aren't creationist sources. These are the paleoanthropologists themselves admitting that this is the case. There's significant overlap between the Australopithecines, between the Homo genus, Neanderthalensis, for example, Floresiensis, Erectus, Naledi, Heidelbergensis. You know, they've all coexisted, intermingled, interbred. There's so many problems with the out of Africa scenario. He talked about peer review, quality control. You know, I agree with that. Creation is testable. Evolution has been tested and it's been falsified over and over and over again. Bones, rocks, geography, geology, they're not inherited sperm and egg. Okay, testable predictions have been made on the creationist side when it comes to Y chromosome, mitochondrial DNA. What testable predictions can he make according to his model? So here's a paper here in groundbreaking find, 3 kinds of early humans unearthed living together in South Africa, Australopithecus, Paranthropus, and the earliest known Homo erectus. Now they'll say, well, okay, fine. You know, they could coexist. For example, a wolf and the domestic dog can coexist, although the domestic dog came from the wolf. But based on what we know about the Laetoli footprints, the chimeric nature of some of the Australopithecines, the domestic dog cannot live before the wolf. We cannot live before our grandfather or our parents, of course. So this as well has been falsified. He must not be aware of the significant overlap we see in the fossil record. Humans and Neanderthals less different than polar bears and brown bears. How does he explain the out of Africa scenario that looks to this population bottleneck that would have reduced the human population to between 2 and 10,000 for 1,000 years, 10,000 years, 100,000 years? Well, guess what? That would have been extremely damaging. Those mutations that were in recessive state would come to the forefront. They'd be manifested, leading to rapid and accelerated genetic degeneration. So how does he explain that according to his model? We can see here clear separation of ape and man. Lucy, 20% complete when you consider the missing feet. Sediba, habilis, Ardipithecus, Neanderthalensis. It's all consistent with our model. We've got here epigenetics, forward-thinking mechanisms. How does he explain that, which requires forward thinking? He dodged the orphan genes. Intronic ALUs influence alternative splicing. So if he wants to convince anybody of universal common ancestry, he's going to have to explain the differentiating lines of evidence. Homology, nested hierarchies. Linnaeus was a creationist. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, based on function. That's why we're looking to function to differentiate the data. How does he explain the fact that these mutations are accumulating from generation to generation, most of them deleterious and unselectable, degenerating our information systems? What type of natural selection? Thank you. Okay, so I guess since I ended there, he can take the first 3 minutes, pick a question, and kind of go from there.
Still muted. There you go.
By the way, just to kind of throw that out there, I thought I was automatically going to be muted by the moderators and stuff, so I didn't mean to interrupt you the last time there and whatnot. Okay, so obviously one thing that's kind of an issue with debates is having time to actually get into questions and get through things. This is the famous Gish Gallop. All right, let me go ahead and throw some things out here. So one thing that creationists love to talk about, if I can get the screen shared here, I'll wait a second until it pops up. There we go. Get it to pop up here. One thing creationists like to talk about is Ernest Haeckel, and they talk about the falsification of embryology. Now, Ernest Haeckel, the funny thing is, most biologists, in fact, when I was earning my degree, we didn't really talk about Ernest Haeckel. It's a whole different subject, but the fact remains that we have similarities between vertebrates. Haeckel was actually going for the theory of ontology, and he did have a little sleight in hand in his drawing, but that does not change the fact that we have similar development in our structures. And it took me a while to think about the significance of this. So what if we look like each other when when we are developing embryos? But think about this here. If we go to an alien planet, we would not expect to see similarities in embryos. But when you look at family pictures like this, you can see children and their parents. These are each pictures of father and son, mother and daughter, and you can see a picture of father and son over here. They are at the same age. If we wind the clock back, so don't look at a grandparent and a grandson. If you wind the clock back to when they were about the same age, you can see these similarities develop, and that is because there's less cell differentiation. They retain their similar traits early on, and if we wind the clock back even further, we can see this even in humans. But we wind back even further, we can see this even in distant relatives, which are the other vertebrates. Now, we can look at these and see similarities because there is a similarity there, okay? Now, moving on here, I can ask you this picture, but I have this all pulled up here. Can you tell which one is different? We can see similarities, but the big difference, I'm trying to watch my time here. The big reason there is similarities is because they are related to each other. And the more related they are, the stronger the resemblance, okay? And we can see these similar traits here. And that brings me into my question that I'm getting at. And it talks about embryology. Why do we see these similar structures in the early development here? Now, again, if we were to go on an alien planet, I would certainly not predict that an alien would resemble anything like this. I would expect to see this in creatures that had a similar genetic structure and were actually developing similar based on the structures. Creationists explain this by saying God did it. They simply explain this by saying God created us all in his image, and this is just simply God's handiwork. But again, why do we retain these features? Why? I'm going to get into some other stuff here later, but I would just like to throw that out there first. How do you explain embryological similarities here?
Awesome.
Okay.
So you had under half minutes. So go ahead, SMT. You got 3 minutes.
Awesome. Okay, well, if we expect similarities on the anatomical and morphological level, and also would then expect it on the genetic level and the blueprint level, all types of vehicles, for example, have similarities in their blueprint stages, just like many animals have similarities in their embryological developmental stages. Todd here seems to want to focus on that which is agnostic to the debate. Creation and evolution can both explain the blueness of the sky and the roundness of the earth. I feel like he stepped into a time machine 30 years ago and entered 2020 with the most outdated, sad, pathetic arguments. I'm sorry to say it. It's like Todd, it's like you dodged every single question that I had in my opening, every single argument that I had in my opening. You said I gish galloped, but then didn't even attempt to address one of the arguments. Why don't you take one of my questions, one of my arguments, run with it? In my rebuttal, I addressed everything that you mentioned, including the claims you made on the Australopithecines, human evolution. I showed a number of papers on DNA function, for example. I showed a number of testable predictions that creationists are making based on genetics. That's what's inherited, sperm and egg, not a bone, not a rock, not a fossil. So my question that I would throw at you, because I just answered your question there, why don't we focus on some differentiating lines of evidence? How do you explain, and I can always share screen again. How much time do I have before the 3 minutes is up, Praise?
Minute and a half. Okay,
so I'm going to share screen here real quick. And go to, so are you familiar, Todd, with all the incoming data on like functional ALUs, functional retrotransposons, the ENCODE data, which suggests that over 80% of our genome is active, overturning the entire junk DNA paradigm, including overturning the chromosome 2 fusion? And are you familiar, we'll let you end with this, the Ventura paper that talks about the ape-specific satellite DNA that is not found at the human chromosome 2 site or in human chromosomes if there really was a fusion event. So I'm just touching on some topics that you brought up instead of bringing up anything new, and we'll kind of run with it. So go ahead, Todd, take your time and hopefully address something from my opening or answer any of the questions that I brought up. Go ahead.
Okay, is this my 3 minute response, or was that his question that he was offering?
That's his 3 minute response, and yours is next.
I guess I thought he was going to ask a question, and then I had my 3 minute response. I just want to know that I'm following the format.
It works together, yeah. So his question and response is in that 3 minutes.
Okay, that's where I just wanted to be kind of fair on this here. Okay, so just wanted to make sure I have a chance to start my clock here. Okay, well, the reason I can't possibly respond to all that is because there's just no way to do it in a short debate format like this. But I will say, creationism, again, it lives in the corners of the internet, and it lives in the corners of echo chambers. If you think for a minute that DNA evidence is falsified by evolution, you are greatly mistaken here. So to answer some of these questions, I can't simply do that because my background is not in this emerging field of science. Think about how much genetics has grown in the last 15 years alone. It is such a rapidly emerging field that unless you are really fully devoted to this, which it sounds like you've investigated this a lot, it is something that is not possible to do in this short period of time. However, I will say every single time I look into this and every single time a new thing comes out, the contrary is actually said, that it further confirms the ideas of evolutionary theory. But somehow on creationist websites, they always have a way to kind of twist this. And they quote mine and always find papers out of context. But when you dig just a little bit deeper, these things are completely misconstructed. And so, for example, we'll use the idea of non-coding genes. Now, we've learned a lot even since I first learned about this here. Whoops, make sure I got my time on here. We first learned about the ideas of non-coding genes have been an idea that has been around for a long time. Years ago, we didn't really have a whole lot of ideas, but now we're learning new ideas in terms of how they function. However, it doesn't change the fact that there is still what we would consider junk DNA within us. But I don't even like that term junk DNA. There's many different explanations for these. Now, retrotransposons, I'm not exactly familiar if you're describing the, what's it called here, the endogenous retroviruses, which function as transposons, because we believe those actually make up a good portion of our DNA, which actually match similarly with retroviruses that would infect our ancestors, and we carry over those genetic remnants within our DNA, and we pass them on, explaining a good portion of our non-coding DNA. So, am I supposed to ask a question in this time, or do I just kind of finish up in this time?
As far as I know, you can do both. So if you have a question, he'll answer it and do his next response. So I'll pause the time. You have a whole minute if you want to finish up.
Oh, gosh. Well, sorry. That's the thing is being our first time here, I just wanted to make sure I had enough time to throw something out here. Okay, so let me go ahead and share my screen and try to get this on here real quick. So I brought up the embryology thing, and, you know, maybe it is a little 30 years ago, but the fact remains that embryology is a powerful tool because it does show something that is of this earth, not something that is independently created. And I get to that because on this next slide, we look at fish and mammals. You can see the similar structures. Now, I do know because my teacher told us that gill structures were on us, and that was an easy thing for me as a creationist because it simply was not or because it's simply not true that we have gill structures. But these structures on embryos, the pharyngeal flaps, do develop in gills of fish, and they develop to parts of our face. But when we look at how these other structures develop in fish, you can see we have these gill arches, and you can see where the blood vessel goes, including the vagus nerve, which controls the heart, and you can see behind gill slit 5, the 4th branch going behind there. Now, in mammals, it's a little bit different because we have the heart coming off of the dorsal aorta and the carotid artery. And because of this change in mammals, am I supposed to? Okay, do I get time to? That's where I'm not sure about the time format here, I guess.
Yeah, so in your response, you can ask a question or address a question. Everything has to be done within that 3 minutes.
Well, then I'll have to finish this later then. But like I said, the format, I wasn't clear on how we were going to format this. Go ahead.
Right.
Okay, so I appreciate that, but I got to say, to the audience, the debate's over. I've won. I hate to say it that way, but it's a fact. It's universal or independent origins. You fail to address any of the differentiating lines of evidence. You go back to the embryological development. Maybe that's all you have. You've dodged. You use the chromosome 2 fusion like it's just the golden evidence. I've given you 3 or 4 or 5 lines of evidence showing you why it's not a fusion event. And even if it was, it would be better explained based on our model of the biblical flood with a bottleneck of 8. I've addressed all your points. You're still not addressing the Y chromosome evidence, the mitochondrial DNA evidence. That I understand. You might not be up to date on it, or up to date on the genetics. But here's the thing. You said you've been doing this for 20 years. You've said you've looked at all this arguments, but yet it's clear that you haven't moved past arguments from the 1980s. The embryological developmental stages, I've already addressed. I don't know why you're going back to it. Okay. The fact is maybe you didn't hear it in my opening, but we start with a working hypothesis that if God, we know that the Bible says that God created us in his image. And if that is actually the case, we should get a sense for how he may have designed the biological world based on the things we design, based on the things we build. We see that we build in nested hierarchical patterns. We build in homologous patterns. And on a blueprint level, we see that all different types of vehicles, whether you're looking at a sedan, whether you're looking at a minivan, a truck, an SUV, you can see similarities in the early stages of manufacturing in blueprints, but it's the final product that you see the biggest differences. I pointed to a number of lines of evidence other than these lines of evidence that are agnostic, like orphan genes, for example. What you said about the non-coding DNA. ENCODE has revealed that over 80% of the genome is actively transcribed in RNA, and these non-protein coding RNAs, I talk about this frequently, they regulate virtually all aspects of the gene expression pathway. Okay, evolution has never predicted this much function. Now, if most of that activity is just useless activity or spurious, for example, it wouldn't make any sense for the cell to replicate all of that useless information. All of those DNA sequences would be mutated to oblivion. We know introns are not just passive spacers. They are rich in splicing factor recognition sites. So, what we'll do to not bring up too many topics, I feel like I've addressed everything you said. So I'm going to just narrow it in. I got 1 minute here. I'll ask a simple question and then we can kind of go back and forth on it. So if I go here, my question would be, if we really are related to the chimpanzee, okay, this paper is actually from, I think, 2007, so there's no excuse to never have seen it. Chimpanzee and human Y chromosomes, when you consider structure, gene content, overall architecture, less than 35% similar, but yet they are supposed to be our closest cousin. So how can you explain that massive dissimilarity? This is a secular paper, Todd. So just focus on this one question. I answered your question on embryological development, chromosome 2 fusion. Now answer one of my questions. How do you explain the massive dissimilarity between human and chimpanzee Y chromosome? And then we'll run with this. And then you can't accuse me of gish galloping. So you can either address a few things in the 3 minutes or directly answer this question. Praise, I am screen sharing for him to help him out, though. Did you make sure to screen share?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Todd. If you want to answer that question, go ahead.
All right. Well, if I get 3 minutes here, first of all, I'll say that again, this is a topic that I'm not super familiar with. So no excuse to see a paper from 2007. I'm not a geneticist. Would I have access to all these and read these all unless this is a topic I'm specifically focusing? I'm not falling for that trap. The simple matter of the fact is, when we look at DNA of our cousins, we can go on Ancestry.com and see who is more related to us based on this. When we look at distant relatives, even on Earth, on different continents, I can actually see who I'm related to on different continents. But when we look at chimpanzees, we see we are similar, and that is through the same standards of DNA tests. Now, you can pull up the Y chromosome and this topic here. No, I have not heard of it, and you can twist it however you'd like. That I should have heard from it from 2007. I am so sorry. Must have missed that section. But regardless, I'm going to use my time, if I can, to go back to my screen. Because,
okay, yeah.
well, hang on. I believe this is my time here. Hang on.
I'm just going to end the sharing.
Hold on. All right, we're going to share his screen. We'll
Okay,
get going.
I believe it's, yeah, I'm going to pull this up.
Go ahead.
Okay, because I was trying to get to this here. Pharyngeal arches. I was asking for why we have these similarities in us and their development. And all we could say here is, oh, this is 30 years ago, blah, 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 blah. And I understand that because it's easy to discount it. But again, you would not predict to see this on an alien planet. Now, look at a fish and a mammal and look at the gill arch in the fourth branch going behind the fifth gill slit there. When you look at development of the mammal, we do not have those gill arches. So you can see evolution took a different path, with the vagus nerve actually having the recurrent laryngeal nerve going behind the sixth arch there like this. And that is because the heart takes a different path. Now, when we look at humans, it goes behind our aorta and it goes up to our neck, to our larynx. And this makes perfect sense. There's nothing wrong with this. But when we look at a giraffe, it takes a 15-foot detour. This is explained because of our embryological similarities with the other animals, including the fish with whom we share a common ancestry. If we look again at us humans here, we developed from the same structures as the fish did. It makes perfect sense, and evolution would predict to find these bizarre setups. This is not intelligent design. This is just straight up, well, sloppy work. That 15-foot detour of the laryngeal nerve is simply there because the giraffe did evolve from a shorter neck animal. Okay, well, that's where I'm going to leave it at. So how do you explain the recurrent laryngeal nerve? A simple thing to understand, no paper necessary to read it. How would you explain this, and how would a creation, an intelligent designer explain something like this?
Okay, let me share screen real quick. So once again, Todd brought up the embryological developmental stages. I have addressed that. Maybe he doesn't like the answer. Homology, nested hierarchical patterns, similarities in different stages of the embryological stage would be expected based on the common design hypothesis, as well as the common ancestry hypothesis. That's one way to look at that, which can differentiate the lines of evidence. And one of those, actually many of those, the ones that he's dodging, for example, the DNA data regarding DNA function, the Y chromosome dissimilarity between chimpanzee and human Y chromosome. Supposedly our closest, our cousin, we descended from a common ancestor with the chimpanzee roughly 6 million years ago, but because of the waiting time problem, they keep pushing that back more and more and more. Now they want to use arguments like this laryngeal nerve in the giraffe, for example. This is kind of like your vestigial organ argument, where they've assumed, for one, they're assuming God's design. I'm sharing screen here because I want to go to, so we can see here vestigial organs or argument from bad design. Back in the day, when it comes to vestigial organs, they assumed, they had a list of over, I believe it was 180 vestigial arguments. I'm trying to find my source here that says, yeah, it was about 180, and now they've got none. Every single one has shown to be functional. And now what they've done is they've actually given a revised definition, where back in the day, and I would ask Todd if he has any paper or source with a prediction from, say, 100 years ago when they first started labeling certain structures and organs as vestigial. Did they actually predict that it would retain some function? I'd like to see that, because now they've revised. Now that we see how functional all of these organs are, for example, the coccyx, which would just be the tailbone, of course, as well as the appendix, the tonsils have a similar function to the entrance to the pharynx. So the argument for bad design, where they say, hey, if I was God, I wouldn't have designed it that way. It's once again an exception to the rule. So he's going to point to this example in the giraffe, for example. There has been some good papers written showing why it is the ideal way, the ideal route. But the point is this whole junk DNA argument, arguments from bad design, arguments from vestigial organs. This is just all arguments from the 1980s. I mean, we've moved past this based on the scientific data that we know to be true. So, for example, I'll end it here with this question: this mitochondrial DNA tree. Why is it exactly what we'd expect given the biblical model? We see there's only a few mutations. We know mutation rates are fast. Todd, how can you get, based on what we know about observable mutation rates, how can we get your, say, Eve to 100 or 200,000 years? Why is there such low variation in mitochondrial DNA, low genetic diversity in humans? And why is there so few mutations on this phylogenetic tree? If you could answer that, I'll end my 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, well, sorry, I'm not going to fall for that one because obviously there's a lot of specialized investigation into this topic. And you know yourself, not everybody can look into each topic in depth individually. That's why I'm not going to fall for this trap. I say we stick to things that are easy enough for the common person to understand, where we don't have to look at peer-reviewed journals. I mean, obviously that is something a scientist is doing, and that's where this debate is actually being held, not in 3-minute responses over the internet like this. So all I can say with these mutation rates is we do use these. We've actually used these to look at the loss in hair in people. In fact, that explains why we have pubic lice and we have head lice, 2 separate louses on us. We can actually use the mutation rate to go back and look at different lineages and how long it took for the what's it called? Body hair to be lost on us. And by the way, why is our pubic louse so similar to a gorilla louse? Nobody quite knows the answer to that, but it seems like about 500,000 years ago, if we use the mutation rate, we can actually calculate this. So I'm going to go ahead and put the screen on here again and get my screen up here again, because I got to bounce back and forth on this. So one other thing, you brought up vestigial organs and you tried to just kind of downplay it. Oh, these lists are out there and it's just something that they always bring up, those silly evolutionists. But nobody that I am aware of in biology said vestigial organs could not be useful for something. That is a misconception. Again, that is only in creationist circles. Vestigial organs are those that had another function and have either lost most of their function, or we could even say have no function at all. But of course, you won't find that on the creationist websites. They like to spin it and say these have a function. So we could talk about the appendix. He did bring that up. And we could ignore the fact that the appendix is used for digesting cellulose because of the bacteria it harbors, and come up with silly little things like, oh, maybe it's in embryos and the development of that, while ignoring that we actually had ancestors that had these. Why are these absent in carnivores, might I add? And it's because they do not digest cellulose. What about our goosebumps? I actually looked at what Answers in Genesis said, and they said, oh, it has a little function here, but come on. This is for body hair, which, by the way, you carry a pseudogene for in your body, a non-coding DNA right now that simply does not activate. Now, you did bring up the tailbone. You did bring up the tailbone, and there are some things that attach to it, muscles and that. But again, it is a fused piece of us that is a remnant from our ancestors. But nobody said it doesn't necessarily have a function. But what about the nictitating membrane of your eye? This here is in many animals, and it's used for going underwater or sleeping. You have this, and you can even pull it out a little bit. It is still there. What about rats? Is this intelligent design for these eyeless rats? They cannot really see at all, but they have these eyes. In fact, they're faded for the most part, so they don't scrape and abrase them when they're going through things. I'd like to ask you about the Polymerase longus. In primates, it has no function. In fact, 15% of us do not even have it, and they've done studies, no change in grip strength. So as far, I'm skipping some that do have functions. What about the ear muscles? We don't hear high frequencies, but if you come behind somebody and you make a high-pitched sound, their ears will turn toward that high-pitched sound. And it's because your ancestors heard high frequencies and you still have those reflexes. And I'll leave you with this. Talk about function. Why do manatees have fingernails? Come on. When you look in a picture, you know there's common ancestry there, and they do have a common ancestry with an animal that had fingers, and it still has those nails, okay? And I guess that's probably 3 minutes there, so I'll have to leave it at that.
Yeah, time up.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm not trying to trap you, Todd. This debate is about independent origins, and I have provided you numerous lines of evidence that can only be explained by independent origins. Why chromosome dissimilarity between humans and chimps, the fact that these gene sequences that are similar actually have differences in gene expression, for example, as well as the orphan genes, taxonomically restricted genes. How does evolution explain the origins of these genes that they can't find any ancestry for? Even the epigenome is incredibly different between chimpanzee and humans. I've pointed to molecular clocks, DNA function, retrotransposon function. You said that we have similar ERVs and retrotransposons in humans and chimps. Well, of course we do, if these ERVs and retrotransposons are functional DNA elements, which is exactly what we've predicted as intelligent design advocates, that these retrotransposons would have function. They would prove to be functional DNA elements. So I like to address everything, and that's okay that you're not able to, well, pretty much address anything in the debate. That's fine. We could reconvene at a time in the future for a second debate, but I do like to address everything, and I feel I have addressed everything that you've mentioned. So now you're bringing up the vestigial organs argument that's been dealt with significantly. Let's go over this. So evolutionists have actually revised the definition of vestigial structure in light of the obvious demise of this argument. I'm actually shocked, Todd, that you're still using this. So when evolutionists, when they, I want to see a prediction where they said that these vestigial structures would turn out to be just as essential and functional as they turn out to be. The Polymerase longus muscle that you talk about is functional. It is a flexor of the wrist, and it functions as an abductor of the thumb. When the thumb comes away, okay, from our palm, this is part of its function. Todd, no offense, I know you're a biology guy, but I got to say you seem rather ignorant of biology. Anatomists understand this, but apparently, Todd, you don't. The muscles of the ear, I've seen you use that. They're also functional, not left over from our ancestors. This is all direct predictions of the design hypothesis. We didn't have to revise the definition. We predict function, function, function. I actually have had 60 debates, and I've debated PhDs, and they don't really use the arguments you're using. Goosebumps, okay? Hairs have muscles that help raise the hair. The hairs on our body are quite small, and they have a muscle and an oil gland and a hair shaft, of course. When these muscles contract, they produce, Todd, a bump rather than raise hair. So while these goosebumps are an emotional response to things that are like thrilling, or maybe for cold weather, anxiety, or if you're scared, they help with regulation, as with every other organ and structure. We see function, function, function. And yet the evolutionists want to just point to the exception to the rule. Like, what about this one? What about this one in the giraffe? The exception to the rule. You know you've lost when your argument is the exception to the rule. The rule should be the argument, and I'm showing the rule tonight. Okay, go ahead, Todd.
You are sitting in an echo chamber coming up with these ideas, and it's not really experiencing peer review, because I'm sorry, the people from ICR as well as AIG, they are basically bloggers rather than researchers. And then they cry foul because their work is not being looked at. And they say the reason they haven't published in peer review magazines or peer review journals is simply because it would be excluded. That is a classic battle cry that they will say. But I'm sorry, that is simply incorrect about these vestigial organs. And again, nobody did say they did not have a function, but rather they are a leftover trait. And yes, we would predict these would be in there because we still see them in humans today. Now, look at your grandparents, your great-grandparents. You might have some remnant traits in your body that actually came from them as well. For example, the tone or the appearance of your skin, even eye color and things like that. These are passed on. But sometimes there are some traits left behind here. So I wanted to kind of get into this, get into my next one here. My question I would like to probably address to you, I didn't start my clock here, so I'm not sure how much time I have, is how would you as a creationist define... Okay, thank you. How would you as a creationist define a kind? Because the common thing that I hear from creationists is a kind is set by the standards of a fourth grader. They can look at two things and any fourth grader can tell it's the same kind of animal. But the truth is, there is no definition to it. They even have the science called baraminology, if we can call it that, saying that we can look at any two things and any fourth grader can tell them apart, but haha, those silly evolutionists, they can't do it. And of course, we can always look at Linnaeus and say he was a creationist and he was on our side, despite the fact that he was around almost 200 years ago. So how would you as a creationist define a kind? I would like to know that.
Is your time up or you have some more?
I don't know what my time is, so I'm just going to...
You're under a minute. You have about 40 seconds if you want to...
Well, I'll just go ahead and stop there because otherwise I'll get rolling, and then I will end kind of odd like I did the first time in the first question.
Okay,
Okay,
so
awesome.
you have some time to spare.
Okay, well, I appreciate that response. So I've provided, and I'll screen share again, 99% of my sources from secular sources, and then one source from creation.com, and Todd says, yes, now I can finally have an argument and point that out. Well, guess what? These arguments are still coming from, this data is coming from secular sources. Why don't you address the 99% secular sources that I've provided? Because you've admitted that you don't have any answers, which is fine, But here's the thing. The debate is universal ancestry or independent origins. And I've shown evidence after evidence that confirms independent origins. I'm sorry, Todd, you've just addressed 0% of the data. The truth is, this new definition, you can find definition after definition of vestigial organ 100 years ago being that of something useless, no function. But now we find that all of these so-called vestigial organs have a function. They had a list of over 180 back in the day. And a counter to your argument, some of these organs are also functionally different depending on the organism that we're looking at. Of course, the function, Todd, of the appendix will be different in a human than in a chimpanzee. Do I really got to point that out? This is actually evidence for my position. And I find the vestigial organ argument hilarious because evolutionists want to constantly point to the loss of structure or the loss of genes as evidence for their belief. And I say belief with capital B and pond scum to people evolution. Where are the true novelties? What, lose it all until we've gained it all? Did a single-celled like ancestor billions of years ago lose everything for billions of years until we got to human? Give me a break. What we're seeing is the rule is function. The rule is function in our DNA. And when it comes to kinds, my definition of kinds would be groups of organisms would descend from the same kind if they belong to the same ancestral gene pool. Okay. Therefore, this is why I point out, and I'm screen sharing for my last minute here, if you can approve that their praise. This is why I'm pointing to DNA function, molecular clocks, to show you that humans are their own kind. And unfortunately for you, Todd, and it's fine, you can't know everything, but based on the Y chromosome data, here's a question, okay? We say humans are their own separate created kind. They descend from their own, the gene pool of Adam and Eve. We look to the hypothesis of created heterozygosity, where God would have front-loaded Adam and Eve, and of course the biblical kinds with these pre-existing functional DNA differences. That's why we make very specific predictions on DNA function, Todd, and that's why I'm pointing to the function we now see in retrotransposons, the function we see in pseudogenes, ALUs, RNA genes, for example. Evolutionists aren't making predictions because they have to assume junk DNA. So here's one here. All human beings are 99.9% identical in their genetic makeup, Todd. How does evolution explain this? Because if we've been evolving for millions and millions of years, we should not have such low genetic diversity. But if we descended from two people, Adam and Eve, the humankind, you asked about kinds, then this is exactly what we'd expect, low genetic diversity. So I'll end it with that just very simple question. Hopefully you don't make it 0 for 10 here, Todd. How do you explain, according to your model, the fact that humans are 99.9999% identical in their genetic makeup, consistent with Adam and Eve? Go ahead.
Okay, this is Genetics 101, because we interbreed. This is an isolated somebody's got their mic on too, if you could check that out. Because we interbreed. We are an isolated genetic group because we interbreed. It's just genetic. Why is that even a question? Of course our DNA is similar, or you couldn't reproduce and you would go extinct. How does this go against the theory of evolution? This is exactly what we would expect. And I'm really surprised that you're expecting a zinger out of it. So you talked about the definition of a kind, and I couldn't help but notice it sounded like you stumped a little on that, and that is because creationists do not have a definition of what kind is. And I go back to what they were saying, and that is that kinds are something that a fourth grader can differentiate. At least that's what I've heard other creationists say. You said a group of creatures that have a similar genetic pool. Well, I'm sorry, but chimpanzees are in our similar genetic pool to us. And that's the thing is, I'm fully expecting you're just going to be in denial of it. And that's what creationism is. It is a full denial of the evidence. We have a similar ancestry to the chimpanzees. Whoops, I shared the wrong screen here. We have a similar ancestry to these. So I really have to push you further on that about what is a kind? Because again, evolutionists or I'm sorry, evolution would say that there is no such thing as a kind. In fact, even the word species is rather blurry. There is no perfect definition because we are ever changing and gene pools different or gene pools separate. So one thing creationists will say is they say you can look at two things like this here and say a fourth grader can tell they're the same kind. A legless lizard and a snake, except no, they're not. In fact, we can say the legless lizard has all the attributes of a lizard, including the narrow tongue, not a forked tongue, external ears, ventral scales that appear. It has every trait you would expect to see of a lizard here. And what about this? It looks like a kind to me, but no, it's not. This is an amphibian. It is in a whole different class, and it has all the characteristics of an amphibian. Likewise, what about the sugar glider and the flying squirrel? Anybody, fourth grader, surely can look at this and say they're the same kind of animal here. Not even close. Go back even further. This is in the class Marsupia versus a rodent. They look similar, but it has all the characteristics of a marsupial. So I really have to press you. What do you mean about common or similar genetic background here? Come on.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I got to point out that, Todd, you're wrong. I stated that kinds are groups of organisms that descend from the same ancestral gene pool. Okay, humans all descend from the same ancestral gene pool of Adam and Eve, as I've demonstrated with the Y chromosome DNA, the mitochondrial DNA, but they did not, based on the genetic data, descend from the same gene pool as a pine tree and a whale. Okay, humankind is separate from all other forms of life. And your examples that you provided, that of convergent evolution, I mean, I'm sure you're aware of convergent evolution, that these similarities, evolutionists wouldn't say is due to recent ancestry or recent relationship. They'll say that these evolved independently. So anytime that you invoke that which requires convergent evolution, you are pointing out to everybody in the audience and myself a lack of uniqueness in your phylogenetic tree. Now, you clearly didn't understand what I said about the 99.99% similarity in all of humans, okay? My point is if we have all descended from just two people thousands of years ago, we would expect low genetic diversity in human beings today. Chimpanzees, for example, they have more genetic diversity within themselves than humans and Neanderthals do. And a lot of paleoanthropologists want to label Neanderthalensis as a sister species or a different species. So explain that to me. The point is, and there is an explanation from the evolution community on why, because they didn't predict such low genetic diversity. I challenge you to show me where they predicted it. They did not. So they invented the post hoc ad hoc out of Africa population bottleneck that reduced the population to between 2 and 10,000. So here's what you didn't understand. If we've been accruing, according to the evolution model, genetic mistakes, mutations for millions of years, Todd, we would expect, according to the evolution model, high levels of genetic diversity like we see in a lot of animals, like we see in chimpanzees, for example. The data confirms the biblical creation expectations. We didn't have to invoke a post hoc, ad hoc, out of Africa population bottleneck. So once again, how do you explain, and if you're going to look to that out of Africa population bottleneck, address the problems with it, just how detrimental and damaging it would be based on the inbreeding, all of those mutations coming to the forefront, leading to rapid and accelerated genetic degeneration. No, it makes sense. If God created two people, Adam and Eve, like I said, they are a kind, separate from all other forms of life. This would restrict genetic diversity. Two people we came from. And this is exactly what we find. Okay, evolutionists were shocked by it. They did not predict it. This is just a fact. And the chromosomes, I mean, similarities, like I said, homology, nested patterns. Of course, we're going to expect more similarities between a human and a chimp than between a human and a bacteria. So the chromosome 2 fusion, then I'll end it with this. How do you explain the lack of ape-specific satellite DNA that should be there if there was a fusion event that is correlated with the chimpanzees? Because the best you have is a human-specific fusion event. And this is from a secular paper, the Ventura paper. So I answered your question on kinds. I hope I've answered all the questions that you've presented to me. So if you could answer that question, you know, where's the satellite DNA that should be there if this was a fusion event that helps your model? Go ahead.
Hold on. So I got to jump in. So the time is over. The format time for for open discussion. If you guys want to extend that, that's fine. Just let me know how many periods you want to do. And if we got to do super chats and questions, so it's up to you guys how you want to divvy that
Oh, you got
up.
questions well, if you have questions, we could do one more 3 minute each if you want to, or who started first on this? Me?
I think, so if you want,
okay. The only reason is I am at 11:30 in my time zone because we did start a half hour later, and our original agreement on 9 o'clock. So originally when we had talked about this, it's an hour later at this point, and just because I just want to have a little time at the house here and everything. It's been a busy day too and whatnot. Todd, especially if there's questions in that. But yes, I can do. Go ahead, and then you can get the final say on this, and then we can move into the next round if you want.
Let's do that, Todd. I want to give you right now uninterrupted time if you want to address the questions on the chromosome 2. Take this time then, if you want to take 5 minutes, whatever you want. Don't bring up anything new, but just try and maybe address anything that you feel like you want to address that maybe you didn't.
I'll go ahead and start talking here. Okay, hang on, because I'll just start. Okay. I just wanted to make sure I had a chance to speak here, because if this is my last chance prior to questions and whatever else we need to do. So, wow, so many questions in there. First of all, I mean, you can say this one question here, ask me to answer it, or all these others, but all the questions, once again, do you even understand what it means to be an isolated population group? Why would you expect there to be more than 99.9% similarity within human genetics? We interbreed together. Otherwise, we simply would not be able to breed together. This is the basis of it. So we can keep kind of getting a little away from the idea of what a kind is, because like I said, the common creationist saying is that a kind is something you can recognize just by looking at them. So you were saying that they came from the same common, I want to say ancestor, but I know that's kind of an evolutionary trigger word to a lot of people. You were saying they descended from the original group that God created. But then I have to bring up the thought again, why would genetics support creationism in there? Because after all, if we're made of a genetic code, and that literally is all we have between us, it's literally just mutation after mutation that accumulates into what we have. Now, even in human genomes, we can kind of twist the words and quote journals and try to expect someone, well, like me right now, to try to answer these on the spot. Sorry, not falling for that trap. But we are made from DNA, the basic core of it. In fact, that is one thing that only Darwin could have just been overjoyed to find out about, because it really did explain the ideas of natural selection. So you were saying, how do you explain the high diversity amongst, I'm not sure if you were saying Neanderthals or regarding chimps, but first of all, Neanderthals were not super highly diverse by any means. They lived predominantly in Europe and across parts of Asia. In fact, I would like to ask a question. Why do we see Neanderthal DNA within us humans? That's right. In your mitochondria, we can see DNA in there. And if you're from Southern Europe, you have more of that mitochondrial DNA. And yet we don't see any DNA in the Y chromosome. And that paints a story to us. It's not a good story, but it almost seems to tell us that there was male Neanderthal with, or male Neanderthal with human female passing these traits on. Nobody fully knows what happens in the story here, but we do see this in the different places in the world. But you know who we don't see Neanderthal DNA in? It's people from Africa, especially Western, Southern Africa. And that is because that's where isolated groups of people have been, where they didn't interact with these Neanderthals. So as far as high diversity in chimpanzees or gorillas, well, of course, there's a high diversity to them. They've been an isolated group for a very long time, but they're also sporadic. In fact, from what I understand, this is something I'm not going to be able to source off the top of my head here, but gorillas that are 50 miles apart in certain places of Central Africa are actually more diverse than any two groups of people on planet Earth. This just goes to show how long they've been there in their populated group, and they have been isolated. But despite being isolated, they still have that high genetic diversity because, like you said, time is involved. But keep in mind, us humans, our species is approximately 250,000 years old, plus or minus. We do adjust our numbers, but not 6,000 years. Our high diversity is simply because of our isolated groups and our relatively short time we have had relative to the gorillas and the rest of the other primates on this planet. So there's a lot of things to go over in there. I guess I'm probably going to have a chance to throw one other question out there, and I'll throw this out there because I didn't even get into geology or any of that other stuff. Since we're just talking about life, how about this? Because if we talk to a lot of lay people, and this is easy enough for anybody to understand here, are we a primate? A lot of people have a problem with that. And so they obviously don't want to say we're not related or we're not similar in any way to the primates. They deny these common features that we have. In fact, if I can show my screen here for just a second, let me pull this up. They deny these common linkages, and you can always turn and say, God did it. When we see these common, say, we have a similar designer, and that is a common favorite. We look at this picture here, and we can see the gorilla fingertips. I don't know if it's showing up on the screen. There it is. It took forever. We look at this, and just like when you see somebody who's your long-lost family member, you know there's a connection there. This is a gorilla hand. So a lot of people look and say, I have trouble with that. I have trouble actually saying that I am related to a gorilla. Looks like I'm at 4.5 minutes, so I am going to try to rush this. My apologies to you on this. So again, people have trouble saying they're a primate, but yet if I ask people, and I don't even talk evolution, I just ask a layperson, and I say, are you a mammal? Most people say, yeah, well, you know, we breastfeed, we come from placenta, etc. And they talk about us being mammals, and they have no issue with that. But as soon as I say, well, are you an animal? I'm just jumping up the ladder. Some people have trouble with that. But if I go up to the domain level and say, are you a eukaryote, which we are, they have trouble with that. Why is it people are okay with us being a mammal and a vertebrate, but they have trouble with us being any other level? It's almost like because then they start to realize it implies common design. I ask you here, at which level are you comfortable saying we are? Are we a mammal? Are we a primate? Are we a hominid? Are we a eukaryote? Are we an animal? What would you say on this? And since this is the last of your time here, whatever you have to say, but again, how would you explain this? And what about in the context of kinds?
Awesome. Yeah. And Todd, because you're a guest here, I want you to, to take as much time as you want there if you feel good with that. I can certainly, I'll take equal time. Praise. How much time was that? I didn't.
That's about 5 to 6 minutes. So take your time, and you have plenty of time, SFT.
Just go ahead.
Okay, awesome. Well, I appreciate it, Todd. Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. I'll try and answer those questions as well and tie up any loose ends. Your answer on the genetic diversity just kind of tells me you don't, which is fine. You don't really. I've studied the out of Africa population bottleneck and the theory extensively, so maybe you're just not up to date as to why the evolutionary community invented the out of Africa population bottleneck. What we see is exactly what we would expect given the special creation of Adam and Eve. Now, evolutionists then brought in coalescence theory. Okay, real quick, actually, I'm just writing things left and right. What you're saying, Neanderthals were never in Africa. Even the evolutionist community will admit this. Evolutionists were shocked to find that there were human variants outside of Africa when humans left Africa. And you're just wrong about the Neanderthal Y chromosome. This was actually discovered. This was discovered recently. So the evolutionists invoke the out of Africa population bottleneck to reduce levels of genetic diversity because they understand if humans have been evolving, you got the Australopithecines and then Habilis, and then you go into Erectus, who exists for 1 million years, and Erectus leaves Africa, for example. They had their own out of Africa event. They use that to explain Neanderthalensis, Heidelbergensis, Floresiensis, Naledi, for example. And then Erectus eventually in Africa evolves into modern Homo sapiens. Modern Homo sapiens leaves Africa, and then the evolutionists were shocked. Like, what's going on? We got the Denisovans, we got the Neanderthals outside of Africa. So that's where you've got like the multi-regional hypothesis. You got the out of Africa hypothesis. Everybody's contesting each other. Everybody's arguing over the data. Let me screen share real quick, actually, and I'll go to. So when it comes to Okay, so when it comes to kinds, there was a recent paper actually that came out right here where they analyzed the barcode across 100,000 species. And the researchers found a telltale sign showing that almost all the animals emerged about the same time as humans. And they also, in the study, the secular study, species they found have very clear genetic boundaries, and there's nothing much in between. If you read the paper, one of them said that he fought the data as hard as he can. Paper after paper, gene mutations began showing up in the last 5,000 years of human history. These are all secular sources, for example. Now, creation scientists, we got Dr. Jensen, Harvard graduate, who has looked at high sequencing Y chromosomal data, and he's noticed that there's only about 4,500 years worth of mutations in the Y chromosome. He's made testable predictions on the history of civilization, and he's challenging all evolutionists to also make testable falsifiable predictions. When you look at the mitochondrial DNA phylogenetic tree, you can see that there's only a few mutations. You can see here that you've got the center point followed by rapid and exponential growth, exactly what we would expect. This is all empirical. We're the ones making the testable, falsifiable predictions. The only prediction I saw really that you brought up in genetics was the chromosome 2 fusion, and I asked questions as to why is the area so degenerate? Why are those sequences there that are supposedly the vestigial remnants of telomeres? Why are they now known to be found all throughout the genome and found to be functional DNA units, not even specific to a chromosome 2 fusion? Also, the fact that the so-called purported site is overlapped by a highly functional gene. You don't get highly functional genes by, boom, slamming together 2 chromosomes. I'm sorry, it's just not possible. And the so-called cryptic centromeric site, they actually haven't discovered it. The area you pointed to is far too small, and that too is overlapped by a functional gene, which means it can never have been a real centromere, and now a deactivated centromere. But most importantly, and you still didn't answer this question, is how do you explain the lack of ape-specific satellite DNA that should be found there? So at best, you have a human-specific chromosome 2 fusion. The genetic data, in my opinion, refutes the fusion event. But even if I wanted to just give it to you, how do you explain it? Just basic genetic drift? I mean, we have the bottleneck that would explain how we could all have the fusion in every single human being. You know, how do evolutionists explain that according to their model? Now, evolutionists did bring in coalescence theory. Okay, and that proposes that given enough generations, you will eventually trace back to just 2 common ancestors. This is what you'll find in the literature, Todd, when you look into it. Now, the fact is this theory was brought in after. So it was post hoc, ad hoc, just like the out of Africa population bottleneck. It has many, many assumptions. One of them being random mating, where you have a population where all the people have a strong likelihood of mating and marriage. Is this true historically? Obviously not. Humans have existed in tribes that have been separated. There is not random mating, and these are the best rebuttals that you're going to find from the evolutionary community. Now, when it comes to the low genetic diversity in the Y chromosome, the mitochondrial DNA, just in humans in general, okay, the only way, like for example, the Y chromosome, the only way you can have a Y chromosome that mutates fast, that is so highly dissimilar to the chimpanzee Y chromosome, okay, every single male Y chromosome on this planet is nearly identical, okay? And it goes back to just one Y chromosomal ancestor in the not so distant past. The only way to explain all of these facts is through the biblical model of origins and ancestry. The Y chromosome is young, okay? The genetic diversity levels tell us that we come from just 2 people, independent origins. That's the topic of this debate. So I wanted to go to another thing here before I end. Even the number of species that we see on the planet correlates. We've made specific predictions on speciation rate according to our model. So for example, here we can see, I'm screen sharing, we've only got between 10 to 12,000 bird species. We can look at lizard species, snake species, bat species, rabbit species. There's far too few species to explain through deep time evolution, okay? We actually see right here, new bird species have evolved in real time through shifts in heterozygosity to homozygosity. So this is reduction in allelic variability. No help to ponds come to people evolution, but just what we would predict based on the created heterozygosity model. Shifts from heterozygosity to homozygosity would produce new species. So we predict, based on what we see, roughly
we got to wrap it up, SFT.
I'll finish with this point for kinds. We would predict roughly 2 to 3 new bird species a year. For 4,500 years, this correlates perfectly, 10 to 12,000 bird species today. But if deep time evolution is true and birds evolved from theropod-like dinosaurs, say 165 million years ago, there should be at least, even considering extinction rates, there should at least be 500,000 bird species. And we can do this, for sake of time, I won't. We can do this for every single species you see on the planet. All fits perfectly with young Earth creation speciation predictions. And I'll end with this. This is what I think we've seen a lot of today. Evolution storyboard with lack of predictions and retrodictions. So thank you. I'll end it there.
Awesome, guys. So that's going to conclude the debate. It was a great debate, great discussion. You guys were very...
Well behaved.
Can I turn my camera on at this point?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I hate sitting in the dark like this.
Actually, it looks HD right now, so it's looking good.
Maybe people aren't on the internet locally.
You guys were so well behaved.
Yeah, Speed, I even forgot you were there.
I know. I forgot I was here.
Well, what we can do now that we've kind of did more of a formal one, we can always reconvene at any time and just keep it just a cordial dialogue where it's not timed responses. We can choose one topic or something, look into, and just focus on that. So I'm always happy to do that in the future.
Be up for it. Yep, I'd be up for it. Weekends work good for me. It just depends on the time and everything. But no, totally.
All right, guys. So we have several super chats and a question.
Okay.
So I'm going to go through them. Ian Chen. This is sometimes people comment, and it's not necessarily a question, but he says SFT and Speed. Love to see you both debate again. So that's up to you. Ooh, that's a challenge there, Speed.
Chromosome 2.
Rematch, Chromosome 2. Yeah, Todd, you should watch Speed and I's Chromosome 2 fusion debate. Speed, he's knowledgeable. I think that would be a good pay-per-view event in the future. Speed, SFT versus Speed, round what, 4 or 5?
Oh.
Whatever. Chromosome 2, round 2.
You must, yeah. I'm sure that I want to say, Speed, given that we've discussed a lot of these topics, you were very patient and respectful. I'm sure you wanted to jump in and you didn't. So A+ for your moderating.
Well, thank you.
And we got a super sticker for $1.49 from Chris Keys. Thank you. And we got Doki with another super sticker. Thank you, Doki. Another one from Doki, super sticker for $1.99. Another $1.99 super sticker. So we got a lot of Dokis here. And let's see here. I'm going to probably have to go to the page really quick and make sure, because some of these super chats, they disappear. So give me 1 second here. We had a significant super chat tonight with Neff. I do know that. We had to. Let's see.
There were a couple by, let's see, Stupid Horror Energy and Jungle Jargon.
Yeah. I'm just going to the monetization page really quick. I'm going to find out. Where do we go? Let's see here. Apologize for the delay here. Just trying to get to the super chats.
All right, I just ran up to get a drink of water, and there's still dead air here. What's going on? Did you forget to save the questions, Praise?
Yeah, but there's a list of them. You have to go under the YouTube account. I just trying to forget where they're all stored at.
Well, I want to say thank you for the super chats. Thank you for the super stickers. I know Brother Neff gave a $50 super chat. So if you can find that one, we'll read that one. Neff, thanks so much. You're a blessing. I
found him.
Okay, go ahead, brother.
All right, so we got one from George Bond for $5. Thank you, brother George. He says, Todd, how did the eukaryote evolve from the prokaryote?
Okay, this is how much time do I get?
As much time as you need, but he has another part of the question. And how did the 3 domains of life evolve from Luca? So take as much time as you need for that.
Okay, well, the 3 domains of life are basically descent with modification. That is the basis of evolutionary theory. And again, this was a long time ago this divergence took place. But as far as eukaryotes, this is a theory called endosymbiosis. And it makes complete sense because if you look at the concept of emergent properties, whenever things work together, they can do more than they could when they were by themselves. So starting off, it was a prokaryote, of course, and it can only do certain little things. One cell got lodged into a larger cell. We can actually do this in the lab too, where we can merge prokaryotes together. Now, we wouldn't classify it as a modern eukaryote, but we can see that prokaryotes emerge inside of others can actually provide benefit to the other. One gets a shelter. The other may, say, provide energy, which is in the case of the mitochondria. And by the way, why does your mitochondria have ribosomes and its own DNA to this day? And that DNA is actually very similar to other bacteria today. We can trace it to that because billions of years ago, prokaryotes merged together and they gained a new property that they had otherwise. So the theory is called endosymbiosis. There's no time, so I'm just trying to make it quick. Right, hear me?
SFT.
So it was his question. Well, you want me to answer that one too?
If you want to respond to that, go ahead. Are you just gonna let it go, or?
Sure, I'll just say a few things. Endosymbiosis, there's some major problems with it. You can find it in the literature itself. Mitochondrial DNA, RNA, DNA in general, nuclear genome. Yeah, we're going to find similarities. We're going to find dissimilarities. That's why I pointed to like orphan genes, which show no consistent hierarchy in the biological world. We're going to see similarities because we're all built with DNA, RNA, nuclear DNA, mitochondrial DNA, for example. But what's fascinating is the mitochondrial DNA, which, yes, we all forms of life do share a lot in terms of similarity. That is uniparentally inherited DNA. That's why we can build some really, really nice family trees using mitochondrial DNA. And what we now know is it mutates fast. There's incredibly low variation. And we only go back to one female ancestor just a few thousand years ago. So the evolutionists, they have to invoke now, of course, coalescence theory, substitution rates. But I showed a mitochondrial DNA phylogenetic tree. You can see there's not a lot of mutations there. And it was taken from the 1,000 Genomes Project. So from prokaryote to eukaryote, or the origin of life, for example, there's numerous chicken and egg problem after chicken and egg problem. So yeah, it's way too short of a time to go through all of the major problems, but I just invite people to look at it. So I will say, because it was Todd's question, he can have the last word.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not sure the format or how long it's going to take, but it's approaching midnight now. I just wanted to kind of, at least in my time zone.
Yeah.
But I'll just leave this off here because I don't want to be unfair to this, but the mitochondria thing, in all fairness, you had been bringing up quite a bit and showing the divergence of the mitochondrial DNA and things we can trace. But doesn't that to you look like a tree of life? After all, DNA is diverging. It is changing. So why is it so hard to jump from there to something else? Now, it's easy to say that, well, because we're a different kind and we didn't come from something else. But again, what would make you say that there is a separate kind? And I would assert that creationists do not have that. But again, the question was on this, so I don't want to be unfair to you either on that.
Okay. Thank you guys for your responses. This is from Jungle Jargon for $5. Why is the CY chromosome now not found in Africa? This is for Todd.
Again, not my background. I'm not going to respond to that because I don't have a response to it. I'm sorry. And you know what? One thing that is nice about it, having the mindset of a scientist, it's a very exciting thing to say there's things I can learn. And part of why I enjoy these is because I can learn from other people, and I still value conversations with people. That's why I say don't stay in an echo chamber. Talk to other people and seek new ideas, because you yourself can grow as well. So I can say I'm proud to admit there's many things I have yet to learn in this field. But as far as this falsifying evolution, I would say dig deeper. It's not there.
Well, let me just say one, because he did ask that question about the kind. So that's why I also showed why humans obviously are their own separate created kind, just simply based on molecular clocks, based on genetic diversity and Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA. But I also showed that study from the secular literature where they discovered a clear separation between kinds, the Rockefeller University study that I showed that, where they themselves said that there's clear boundaries, which is exactly what we would expect. They had to invoke what's called a selective sweep, right, just to explain the data. But yet this is exactly what we'd expect. So 2 questions. Are you familiar with that study that suggests over 90% of life we see today arose at the same time with clear genetic boundaries? And why is that not convincing evidence to you for the kind boundaries as we would purport? Go ahead, Todd.
So am I jumping back into another?
Kind of pithy now. Yeah, we'll just try to make. So after the second responses, make them pithy, and we'll get to the next one. We can keep this going. We'll be here all night.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah.
Praise, can you ask Brother Nephilim Freeze $50 super chat?
Yes. So Nephilim, he was the highest amount of giver tonight, and so thank you so much, Neff. That was very generous of you for $50. And he says, since DNA is information operating linguistically and algorithmically, and these things require a mind, how is denying creation scientific? I guess that's for you. Creation, yeah, OutScience. I'm sorry.
I guess I'm not quite sure what the question is on there, because first of all, I don't necessarily, it sounds to me like a word salad, as we would call it, where you take a bunch of words and say that it's linguistically defined. We could call it a code, but at the same time, it's literally just DNA is translated to RNA. It's read in the ribosomes. We can call it a lot of different things there. I'm not quite sure what the ending part of that question was, though.
He says, so since DNA is information operating linguistically and algorithmically, and these things require a mind, how is denying creation scientific, anti-scientific?
That just sounds non sequitur. I'm not even sure how I would answer that. I'm sorry, that just sounds non sequitur there. How is it anti-creation? I'm not sure what. I guess I'm not sure about it. But as far as evolutionary theory, genetics, like I said, this is where I don't want to go down the rabbit hole and then redefine evolution or re-talk about evolution and get on a whole rabbit hole about this. But I really don't follow that question at all. It sounds non sequitur. Nephilim, I'm sorry.
Gotcha. So if you want to respond to that, go ahead, SFT. We can go to the next one. It's up to you.
No, why don't you do, just for respect to Todd, why don't you just go through them real quick, because we're going on 2 hours and we got some after shows to go to as well. So if you want to just fly through the super chat, and yeah.
So David P. Neff, question to both. What would falsify your position and verify the other?
I can start. I'll just reiterate a couple things that I said in my opening when it comes to molecular clocks. Of course, I've always said over and over again that the best way to determine ancestry is through genetics. That's what's inherited, sperm and egg, not a rock, not a bone, not geography, not geology. These things aren't inherited. Even looking to the fossil record, it's low confidence science. So for example, how do you define species would be a question I have for the evolutionists, and typically they'll respond to that which can interbreed, interbreeding population. But then in the fossil record, you don't know. You don't know if they interbred. You don't have their genetics. You don't know if this is the result of convergent evolution or recent relationships. He even showed that you can have marsupials, you can have placental mammals, marsupial mammals with similarities where it looked like, just based on their gross morphological and anatomical similarities, that they share recent relationship, but then they have to invoke convergent evolution, which is exactly what we'd expect based on the design model. Look at a Volkswagen Jetta. You can buy it in a diesel. You can also buy it in a regular engine. Doesn't prove they evolved from a skateboard billions of years ago. So here's the thing. We would look to molecular clocks and DNA function. I talked about one way to falsify it is to show that our genome is mostly junk. Okay, because if we invoke design, we invoke the front-loaded genetic diversity model that says, hey, God would have engineered these design variants, these design DNA elements in Adam and Eve and the created kinds, we would then predict DNA function. Now, of course, there's genetic entropy, so it wouldn't be the entire genome is functional, but a lot more functional than the evolutionist. So there's a direct head-to-head prediction that can falsify the model. Is the genome only 10 to 20% functional, or is it like 70 to 80% functional? Head-to-head. We've made the predictions. Now it's up to them. So go ahead, Todd.
Well, the thing is, evolution has underwent many, many years of attempting falsifiability. That's why it's withstood the test of time so long, just like cell theory. But there have been many other theories in science that have not withstood the test of time. To falsify evolution, genetics could have easily have done that back in the 1950s. So it's interesting that creationists are using genetics and trying to say that it actually confirms and it doesn't falsify. But the truth is, they're twisting the research on this to make it seem like it's actually in their favor. For example, with the phylogenetic trees, you're drawing with the mitochondria in that. Again, why stop there? You just simply stop there and say that, well, it's because it's a kind and because we can't say they're connected. But the truth is, they're all connected by the same code. Why is there no difference there? Now, as far as there being junk DNA and stuff like that, the research is still emerging on that. And so science has a lot of questions to ask on this. But in terms of evolution, nobody in evolution, well, back in the 1960s, early on, but nobody today has a problem with this idea of there being functional sections in DNA. But when we look at DNA, there are massive sections still that are yet unexplained because we can splice them out and we can still make mice from them. For example, if we also look at other organisms, such as an onion, it has 200 times the amount of DNA bases that we have. But if we look at an amoeba, actually, there's two different types of amoebas out there. One of them has about 200 times more DNA, and the other has 50 times more DNA than us. Now, they're both amoeba. Why do they have so many differences? Now, out of respect here, how could we falsify evolution? Well, it's pretty simple. We could not see it genetically within the common ancestry. It's easy enough that we could look at animals and we could see traits in spiders that appear in vertebrates. Don't even go to arthropods and the rest of us vertebrates. Let's just look within mammals themselves. We would see hooves in animals that were not descendants of Artiodactyla. Like I was saying earlier with the antlers, we would expect to see the same kind of antlers in organisms that were also not descendants of that. We would expect to see in any other lineage not those traits. So falsifiability, there you go.
All right, thank you for your answers. So I'm going to get Stupid Whore Energy out of the way here. She has a comment, then she has a question for SFT. So her comment is, two proteins don't need to have high level of sequence similarity to perform the same function. That's why similarity points to relatedness. And if you guys want to respond to that really quick, it has to be pithy, no question. It's just a comment. You can respond to that if you want.
So there are proteins that are dissimilar. Also, repeat that again. I was waiting for the question.
Yeah, I'm going to get to the question here in a second. So two proteins don't need to have a high level of sequence similarity to perform the same function. That's why high similarity points to relatedness.
Well, here's the thing about this whole similarity thing. I pointed out that a lot of that which is similarity, whether it's in the proteins, whether it's in the non-coding regions of our genome, coding regions of our genome, a lot of it, like if you're looking at chimpanzees and humans, even though there's similarity there, you're still looking at gene expression differences, or the epigenome as a whole is completely different. But as I've pointed out, evolutionists like Todd here saying, we are apes. Well, here's the thing. By definition, whether it's design or ancestry, we had to have been more similar to some creatures than less similar to other creatures in terms of DNA, morphology, physiology, anatomy. So do evolutionists, when they say this, when Todd says this, does he think God created humans and then every other form of life equally distant in terms of these aspects from humans? No, of course, God created creatures like the great apes that we share more in terms of anatomy and genetics with, and other creatures like bacteria and fish that we share less. This is just basic. Evolutionists, if they want to win the debate or they want to win this war, creation versus evolution, they need to stop looking to the blueness of the sky or the roundness of the earth. They need to look at the differentiating lines of evidence. Todd over and over again keeps saying, where's the evidence for the kind boundaries? I provided him 3 times a paper from the secular literature that shows genetic boundaries in kinds. Answer it. Don't just repeat without answering the argument. Go ahead.
Since this was SFT, give a quick response here. ED, if you want to get going with that.
Okay, yeah, because that sounded like a comment, not necessarily a question. I don't want to use a lot of. If there's more questions, I'll give him my closing statement, a response to his thing there. But go ahead. I'll just end right there.
So here's the question for SFT: is suggesting that are you suggesting that their recombination rates were higher in the past?
Okay, so is that from Super Whore Energy as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, Super Whore Energy is good. We've had super chat debates on chromosome 2 fusion, so she is up on this, which is good. Now, here's the thing. The PRDM9 sites, the papers that I was showing were the Africans, where they have more of those sites, and they have evidence for more recombination. They have more genetic diversity. And the evidence suggests, I'm pulling up the paper here, here it is, PRDM9 controls activation of mammalian recombination hotspots. There's more hotspots in African people groups. That's why they have more genetic diversity. Now, here's the thing. Mutations actually break down those enzymes, those PRDM9 sites. That means in the past, you would have had more, and therefore you would have had more recombination. More recombination means that that population can retain what? It can retain more genetic diversity. And this is right from the secular literature. I got 4 papers here that talk about it. So yeah, in the past, there would have been more recombination because you had more of the enzymes that help control recombination and activate those recombination hotspots. So I hope that answered the question. Good question, though. Really good question.
You can quickly respond to that too, ED, if you want to respond to that.
I'm not going to take a lot of time on it. I'm just saying, I just think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of genetics and how it applies also to natural selection. After all, I did see your video on this SFT on you were talking about mutations, and you were talking about bad cells in your body being killed, but the good cells in your body being left behind, which shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how this all works together in the first place, and mutations. So I'm just going to stop it there.
Well, I think the fundamental misunderstanding came from you, Todd, since you addressed like 0% of my argument. So go back to the drawing board, come up with some actual rebuttals, and we'll do a second debate.
All right. Okay, we'll just keep that separated right now, these little side remarks. But here we go.
Yep.
How does evolution explain the editase? And I think that's focus that, Todd, if you want to respond to that.
This is where I have to get caught up on genetics, because these modern day debates, everybody's focusing on the genome, and it is a very fast emerging science. Answers are coming. I do not have an answer to it. But does that mean there is no answer out there by default? Absolutely not. But if you look again into the corners of the internet, you will again find in your echo chamber the answers that you want. But no, sorry, do not have an answer for that, because I'm not a geneticist.
I want to point out one thing. 99% of the papers that I showed in my opening, the papers I just discussed on the PRDM9 enzymes, there's no echo chamber. These are coming right from the secular literature. And the genetic boundary study that I showed you now 4 times, you have not responded to. That's not from a creationist source. So, I mean, you're just going to have to update yourself and come into these debates, because yes, genetics is a growing field. We understand so little of the DNA language. Darwin knew nothing about genetics. Now we know a lot about genetics, and it's confirming biblical creation. So you just got to update yourself, Todd.
There we go. So thank you for your responses. So this Doki gave like 7 or 8 other super chats, equaling over like $30. So thank you so much, Doki. You are the bedrock of this channel. So thank you so much. And we got, let's see here, George Bond. So George Bond he gave another super chat saying, standing for truth official. And another super tap by, wow, George Bond too. So George Bond and Doki are both the bedrock of this channel. I noticed that they're very consistent here, interacting with this channel. So thank you guys so much. And he says, do you like pizza or we love pizza at SFT? I'm not sure. What does that mean, SFT? Do you know? Or?
Sorry, I was on mute laughing. He said pizza and what?
He says, do you like pizza? We love pizza at SFT.
Yeah, every time George sends me a picture of pizza in our WhatsApp group, I order a pizza within 5 minutes. He's bad for my health.
And then George for another $5 super chat. He goes, John wants to know if Sarfati ever played Fisher in chess. I'm not sure if.
Yeah. No. We asked Dr. Sarfati that last week in our interview. He said no. He said, but he knows people who have.
Great. So I think this question is for the evolutionists. This is at you. I'm sorry. This is from Chris Keith. Thank you so much, Chris. Dr. Sarfati, what are you? So, somehow, Dr. Sarfati, what are your thoughts on punctuated equilibrium?
Okay.
Praise. Okay. So we're going back to the other one. So, okay, it looks like we're all done. Awesome.
Praise.
That was the first non-genetic question. Yeah,
no. Those were the wrong super chats. So, no, you got through them all, Praise. You guys did great. So why don't we do this? So I want to point out we got after shows on Speed's channel as well as John Maddox's channel, and I'm going to give the last word to all the guests. So we got Speed who moderated, Praise you modded, Todd. I want to thank you so much. These debates, they do get heated after a while. It's all in good fun. I really enjoyed your company. I thought it was a great discussion, great debate. I hope for more in the future.
I appreciate
I
it.
want to give it to you guys. Have some final words. What'd you think? And then we'll move to the after shows.
As far as me as a moderator, I really enjoyed it. I thought they were really cordial and respectful, and I thought there were some good points on both sides. And I wish to have another discussion sometime with OutScience. So looking forward to it. Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Okay.
I guess we'll shut her off then. You guys
Okay. Well, and in conclusion, if I can say thank you very much for hosting me on this. I do apologize. I've been up since about 4. I thought that pizza question was going to come to me because my answer to that would have been, I will eat anything at this point because I haven't eaten anything. I made my kids dinner and I got them to bed. And like I said, at first I thought we were starting at 9 o'clock. So it's definitely gotten me up a little bit late here. But, it's all in good fun. But I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. No, you've definitely earned a meal. I'll be in the after show, but I'll be spending the first little while pigging out on some food. So I too am hungry. It's been 2 hours and 15 minutes. Awesome, Todd. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Speed, for moderating. Thank you, Praise, for moderating. And I'll end it here with our video. But yeah, go over to John's channel, go over to Speed's channel for an after show. Standing for Truth is out. For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit